All right. I hate doing this, but it's roster projections. And I hate doing it, especially on a team like the current Texans team, because there's a lot of good, promising young players that I think the Texans are going to have to let go of that are not going to make it through waivers, are going to get picked up by somebody else before the Texans can put them on the practice squad. It's a good problem to have. It's a good problem. It's like having, having to sell something just for tax purposes or something, I suppose. I don't know if that's the way it works or not. I do whatever my accountant tells me to do. The 53-man roster projection, I want to put it out now before this final preseason game and final cuts this weekend. So you guys can hold my feet to the fire and tell me where I was stupid and where I was wrong. I've got varying degrees of confidence in all of this, but we'll start with the quarterbacks. I don't think Brett Rippon makes the cut. I think that he's here because they needed a body, and it ends up being C.J. Stroud and Davis Mills. This is the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel, by the way, in case I forgot to mention that. There's too many tough decisions in other positions like wide receiver and defensive line and offensive line right now for me to feel confident keeping three quarterbacks. I feel like if you keep a third quarterback, it should be a developmental guy or a guy that you 100% want to start a game for you if the top two guys get injured. So we'll worry about the third quarterback spot if and when one of those other two quarterbacks. Why did I say if and when? I almost said if and when one of those two quarterbacks get injured. If one of those two quarterbacks in C.J. Stroud or Davis Mills got injured, then we'd worry about bringing somebody else back in. But there's no shortage of guys kind of along the same framework of a Brett Rippon, veteran guys who have been in multiple systems and can pick it up quickly. So this is going to give us a little bit room to work with. When we get to, say, the running back room, these are the four I've got. And man, this could go a bunch of different ways. I think David Montgomery and Woody Marks obviously are going to be on the squad. British Brooks, both because of his ability to play fullback potentially, but also because of his work on special teams and because of the precarious health nature of everybody else. British Brooks is back and healthy, so I think he makes the squad. And then Noah Whittington versus Jawar Jordan. I think Noah Whittington is really, really promising. I think he's got some things to learn when it comes to NFL pass protection, but I think he runs the ball really well. I think he runs like a veteran player or more like a veteran player than he does a rookie player. He had 6 years of college football. So when you include the one red shirt year he had where he played 4 games, and he looks like it. He looks like it. He knows what he's doing out there. Jawar Jordan has had a lot of injury issues in the past, and he's injured right now. And he's a smaller guy. He's made it through waivers before. So I think Noah Whittington ends up getting a spot on the active roster. It ends up being David Montgomery, Woody Marks, Noah Whittington, and British Brooks. FanDuel, by the way, has the rushing touchdown over-under for David Montgomery this year at 7.5. I like that. I wouldn't touch his total yards, but he's had 8 or more touchdowns each year that he was in Detroit. It's been declining. 2023, he had 13. 2024, he had 12. Last year, he had 8. But being in somewhat of a similar role as he was last year, where it's going to be a 2-back backfield with him and Woody Marks. And because D'Amico gets kind of stubborn about, dang it, we're going to run it down on the goal line and we're going to run it inside because I need to see that these guys can be physical when I need them to. I think there will be at least a few moments this year where D'Amico tells Kaylee, we're running it up the gut. We are going to impose our will. We need to prove to ourselves we can do this, and David Montgomery is going to be the guy in those situations. And I think that game plan by game plan and opponent by opponent, it's going to change who gets the lion's share of the carries and the touches. But I do think David Montgomery will also be used a lot more in the receiving game. Owen Wright was a tough one just because John Harris has a lot of really positive things to say about Owen Wright. He's only been on the roster for a little while now, but Deuce Vaughn would also be out the door in that scenario. Wide receiver, I think is going to be 6 guys. And it's tough because it's super competitive at the back end of that. It would have gotten really interesting if they hadn't gotten a named replacement for Jaden Higgins. But right now, Nico Collins, Xavier Hutchinson, Kayshon Boutte, Jalen Noel, who looked really good the other day, by the way, at the combined practices. I wasn't there, but that's what's been reported. And he looks great during OTAs too. But his explosiveness and their ability to do some funky things with him are very much in play. And then I've got Jared Wayne and Justin Watson. So I have to fact check my numbers on these as we go along. The simple arithmetic sometimes eludes me. The tough one here, except that I think this is almost a foregone conclusion at this point, because we haven't seen Tank Dell practice in about a week or so, and he really hasn't even been out on the field all that much. I think that he's definitely not at a point where they feel like, oh yeah, throw him in the game, and we'll be able to get as much as we want out of him. So whatever kind of setback he had, or where they're resting with a little bit, I think the most likely scenario for him is not cutting him, but putting him on an IR with a designation to return, where he can come back after 4 weeks. The team gets 2 exemptions for their IR with a designation to return at the very beginning of the season. I mean, technically it's right before the final cuts. So he wouldn't count against the 53-man roster. So he's not on the 53-man roster, but IR designated for return, which means he can come back at some point this season if they so choose. In this situation, Sterling Shepard, Josh Kelly, and I think Josh Kelly's got a really good shot of making the practice squad. Trayvon Sanders, Daniel Sobkowitz, I think also has a really good chance of making the practice squad. That's where that shakes out. Zay Jones would also be released. Nico Collins on FanDuel has his receiving yards set at 1,150 and a half. So I would take the over on that in a heartbeat if you could guarantee me that he was going to be healthy. I think the fact that Jalen Noel is healthy in there, the fact that they added it to Kayshon Boutte, yes, those guys will get their touches. Yes, I think the tight ends are going to get more touches this year. I think the receivers or the running backs are going to get more touches this year. But all of those things don't necessarily detract from Nico's ability for some deep strikes downfield where he can just accumulate yardage in chunks. And I think that's what's going to happen as long as he's healthy. It's just a matter of whether he stays healthy or not. So we go to tight ends. And this is where we had to rob Peter to pay Paul in some of these, like at the quarterback position, for instance. At tight ends, we didn't keep an inordinate amount of wide receivers, but tight end, I've got 4 tight ends. And if you're a team that's planning on using multiple tight end sets a lot, it's not exorbitant to keep 4 tight ends. It's probably what you should expect. I mean, because Nick Caserio and Nick Caley and D'Amico Ryans both have hinted at using 13 personnel, where you've got 3 tight ends on the field. So for tight end, I've got Dalton Schultz, Foster Moreau, Marlon Klein, who everybody's super excited about, and then Cade Stover. And Cade Stover's ability to play fullback or H-back also, and I think they want to keep developing him there. He's played well enough that I think he's one of those 4, and it was made a lot easier because Brevin Jordan is injured yet again. Could he possibly be IR designated to return? I think at this point, as he's still working back from that knee injury, depending on how much cartilage damage there is or anything else that we just don't know, that we wouldn't be privy to, I think it's more likely than not that he's not on the roster come final cuts. Lane Pryor and Lewis Hanson would also be cut there. Marlon Klein's going to be an interesting one early in the season because both CJ Stroud and Foster Moreau have kind of mentioned that they like him a lot. Boy, he's got a lot of potential. He works his butt off, but he still needs to work on the mental side of learning how to be a tight end in this offense and in the NFL. So what goes on behind the scenes? Where are the mental errors that made that we don't necessarily pick up on? How is he running his routes in conjunction with exactly how CJ expects them to be run? I don't know. I mean, he's going to be on the roster 100%, and he's shown exactly why everybody's so excited about him. I'm just curious about just how much he's used early on and how quickly he can get up to speed. Because I think Caley probably wants to use him as much as possible, as long as he can handle it. And he's progressed every step along the way during training camp. I went from being somewhat skeptical of him and didn't get to see him much during OTAs because he had that the hamstring injury, if I recall properly. But man, ever since he got healthy and he's been out there, it's just been step by step by step. He's improving, and I think he's got the potential to be a really good tight end in the NFL. It's really exciting. Offensive line, nine offensive linemen. And I'll go in order of the starting offensive line as I expect it. Arianante Ursary at left tackle, Keelan Rutledge at left guard, Evan Brown at center, Ed Ingram at right guard, and then Trent Brown at right tackle. If you haven't been paying attention to the Texans all that much and you're just tuning in, maybe you checked out after free agency and the draft, you might say, wait a second, weren't Wyatt Teller and Braden Smith your big free agency acquisitions? Yeah, they were. They were our big free agency acquisitions. But they were not huge spends. And I think if you look back at the way they've operated on the offensive line the last couple of years, I think Caserio has spent enough in terms of draft picks and in terms of free agency spending to create a genuinely competitive situation. And so far, right now, I mean, Keelan Rutledge has looked better than Wyatt Teller, and Trent Brown has looked better than Braden Smith. So the backups after the starters, Wyatt Teller and Braden Smith at right guard and right tackle. Wyatt Teller could swing around, from left to right. Fibechi Wiwu, interior offensive lineman, draft pick. He's looked really good at times. He's looked like a rookie at other times. I think he looks pretty smart when it comes to sorting out games and picking up blitzes and understanding where he fits in the protection. He's very promising right now. And then the guy that I wasn't so sure about coming into camp, but who I think has done enough to show that he should be on the roster, is Blake Fisher, and not just as a sixth offensive lineman. I do have some concerns just about his overall strength. I think he looked like he trimmed up. His body composition is better. He's moving better, is like a little bit more athletically by offensive line standards. I think his technique is improved. There's still some times where I'm not sure he's strong enough when it comes to playing against the George Karlaftises of the world, not to mention the Will Anderson, Danielle Hunters and Will Andersons of the world. But I think, especially given how D'Amico spoke about him the other day, talking about how much he's improved, pretty sure he's on the squad. Some of the notable cuts would be Jake Andrews, obviously, because that's notable because he started the whole year last year. Jarrett Patterson, which I think if the Texans decide to keep 10 offensive linemen, I think Jarrett Patterson's on the squad. James Neal, the rookie undrafted free agent, who is very intriguing because I think he's very much a project, but also they paid him the most of any of their undrafted free agents in terms of guaranteed money. So I think they like him, but I think they also knew what they were getting into and that he's very raw and is probably a developmental project. So they probably hope that he makes it through waivers. Eli Cox, another practice squad candidate. And then Sam Hagan, who's been out there playing a lot, and I think they probably look at as a practice squad candidate. They hope that he makes it through waivers. So that's the offensive side of the ball. Let's get to the defense. Defensive line. This is where I had to most question myself. All right, Seth, are you being a little bit biased towards the big fellas on the defensive line because you were a defensive lineman yourself? Truth be told, I probably am, but there's a catch. And one thing that D'Amico, in drafting Caden McDonald, I think especially, was concerned about this offseason was A, the bulk on the defensive line, but B, the fact that they lost so many defensive tackles to injury last year that they were playing with guys that they had to pick up mid-season and relying on them in playoff games, which is not ideal. Even though one of those guys, Naquan Jones, I think did really well for himself, and he's showing potential to keep him around. So I had 10 defensive linemen stay with the squad. The defensive ends, Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter. Everybody just put your tongues back in your mouth and stop acting so surprised that those guys made the team. Jadeveon Clowney. Logan Hall, I would say, is a flex. He can play inside. He's played more inside right now, but he can also play edge if somebody gets injured. And then I've got Solomon Byrd making the team too. And I don't know if he would have if there weren't for injury situations, but Solomon Byrd has showed up enough. And I think that not just in the preseason games, but in practice, he's been very disruptive. So I think Solomon Byrd makes the team. When you go inside, Sheldon Rankins, Tommy Togiai, they're your starters. I've got Mario Edwards making the team. I've seen a few projected rosters where they don't have him making the team. Then Caden McDonald, obviously, as the draft pick. And I've got Naquan Jones. And partly, does Naquan Jones make the team last year? I don't know. I don't know if he would or not. But I think that having enough health and enough guys to rotate in. And when guys do get injured, it's not just that you need replacements for the starters or the backups who are named backups on the page. You've got to be sure that you've got enough guys to rotate in. So as Matt Burke says, they always want to be throwing fastballs. They want those defensive linemen rotating in so guys can play as hard as they can. If you think about like hockey lines, hockey players go out and bust their butts for 45 seconds to a minute and a half or whatever. And then they need to blow. That's how they want their defensive linemen playing, just 100 miles per hour all the time. The Caden McDonald, I think, has made some progress. I still think he's not as good in terms of, okay, what can I expect from him on game day, as the top 4 defensive tackles. So Sheldon Rankins, Tommy Togiai, Mario Edwards, and Logan Hall, I would put into remember, he can flex back and forth. But I think they're going to get some snaps out of him in short yardage situations, in certain situations early on. But he's progressing. He's just, you can see he's trying to, when you try to change your stance and you try to change the way you use your hands, and I know we're just big, dumb defensive linemen and all, but it's a lot. And sometimes it makes it hard to just play free and loose. But I've seen growth in him. Will Anderson spoke real highly about him the other day. So to keep 10 defensive linemen, I had to rob from the linebackers a bit. And this is a tough one. And I have zero confidence in this one because they could go a million different ways. I will say, I don't think that I'm as pleased, or D'Amico, I'm guessing, isn't as pleased with the competition for that third linebacker spot to replace EJ Speed, who's currently on the physically unable to perform. He probably won't be available until at best late October or early November, if at all, this season. But these are the 5 I've got. A lot of you might disagree with this. I've got Azeez Al-Shaair, Henry To'oTo'o, Wade Woodaz, drafted in the 4th round. He's shown enough of his physical promise. You saw the interception return. He's still a bit clunky in playing fast and free, pulling the trigger against the run, knowing exactly where he fits in pass coverage, but you can see the upside in him. Then Jake Hummel and Jake Hansen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, Jake Hansen. Partly with Hummel and Hansen because of their special teams prowess, partly because they're veterans and you can rely on them. And again, but those guys haven't really stepped forward in the competition for actual starting linebacker. I think there's still the very real possibility that they trade for or pick up somebody off of waivers, a veteran linebacker at some point here, if D'Amico's not super enthusiastic about it. So that means that Aiden Fisher gets cut. He's a draft pick this year, but I think he'll be on the practice squad. And then Jamal Hill also. And, this is the year where Jamal Hill, who does some good things on special teams, but I think they were really hoping to see a step forward this year. It is by evidence by the fact that they drafted 2 linebackers in the draft. So that one I'm not confident about, but that's the odd man out when it comes to, hey, you've got this third linebacker spot. You've got one spot that's being soaked up by a rookie that we don't know if he's really ready to play yet. Well, let's at least have another couple guys who are good on special teams, but who can also step in and play if we have to. And they'll go with the veteran capabilities there. Okay, so when we get to the defensive backs, slicing and dicing the defensive backs on this team is a little bit tricky because you have that finicky Jalen Petrie position. Or is it a safety? Is he a cornerback? Is he a linebacker? I don't know, but we'll just we'll keep it at the cornerbacks. 5 cornerbacks: Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, Jalen Smith, and I think they like Jalen Smith, and I think he's flashed enough and draft pick, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The one that I was having a hard time with was Colin Wright. So Colin Wright, they were just gushing about for the first few weeks of practice, and he was showing up over and over and over again. Didn't play as well in his first preseason game, and then didn't play in his second preseason game. I don't know if they think, okay, maybe he'll make it through on waivers. He was an undrafted free agent. I know that there was a lot about buzz about him before the draft as being a guy that might be valuable as a late round pick. So there's other teams out there that probably like him, but they wouldn't have necessarily seen the good film on him because all we've had is practice and some reports and quotes out of players and coaches, but they really seem to like him. And then Tremont Smith, I would keep Colin Wright and I would keep Tremont Smith. So that gives you 5 cornerbacks. And then for safety / star position that Petrie plays, I'm going to keep 4 there. Well, I'll lump Jalen Petrie into that, so we'll call that 5 at the safety position if we want to. We'll do what the Pro Bowl voting makes them do, which is lump him in as a safety, which screws him in the Pro Bowl vote. Kalen Bullock, Reed Blankenship, Kamari Ramsey. No big surprise there because A, Kamari Ramsey is a draft pick. He's drafted for a reason. But B, man, I think he's played really well. And he was one of those guys that was kind of quietly going about his business. Didn't notice him a whole bunch, not because, which is good and bad as a rookie, because he wasn't coming up and making as many plays as Colin Wright in the first couple of weeks of camp, but he also wasn't messing up a whole bunch. Then he shows up big time in the first couple of preseason games. So he's going to make the team regardless. But I feel very pleased with his advancement and development. What Dino Vasso and his crew can do with him might be really interesting. And then I've got Elijah Huzzie making the team as a safety / Jalen Petrie position, and just going down and playing the slot. Codrington has flashed a lot too. I think maybe just Huzzie's experience in the system at this point might be more of a deciding factor, but that's a tough one to call with those guys. And then your specialists, Austin Brinkman, Kaimi Fairbairn, and Kai Kroger. So as Sean Pendergast wrote in his spot in the Houston Press, nothing to see here, as these 3 have been written in ink since the team parted ways with rookie punter Jack Stonehouse. And credit to Kai Kroger, who got off to a really tough start, and I did not know what I was thinking about Kai Kroger, but he's done well in that first preseason game, kind of surprised me, and we're good to go right there. My biggest concerns about the team right now are going to be that I don't know how I would put A on it. Offensive line. Offensive line, until I see it with my own eyes, I'm not going to 100% believe it. I do think that they are better than they were last year. I just need to see it all operating well enough that they actually have a good rushing attack. I got nervous when I started seeing the reports out of Carolina yesterday that in the first series, the run game wasn't doing much. And meanwhile, they were tearing it up through the air. And they would go on to basically dominate the Panthers for the rest of the practice after that. So I think I feel really good about Keelan Rutledge. I've been pleased with what I've seen from Evan Brown at center. I am concerned about the fact that Braden Smith is injured. It's only supposed to be a few weeks, but that means that he might not be available week 1. So I'm not super stoked about the depth right there. I think Blake has improved a lot. But I don't, and God, if I said Braden Fisher instead of Braden Smith, I apologize. I've been having this issue with Braden Smith versus Blake Fisher all training camp long. But I'd like to have Braden Smith out there as a swing tackle. And then Wyatt Teller just has not looked comfortable in this system. There's moments where he looks just like vintage Wyatt Teller. There's other times where he doesn't necessarily. So I don't feel as awesome about the depth of the offensive line as I did at the beginning of the year or beginning of training camp. I do feel better about this starting 5 than I did about last year's starting 5. And last year's starting 5 improved a lot throughout the season, but we saw what happened when injuries came into play. And I think, again, Jarrett Patterson might end up being a guy that makes that final cut, depending on how their numbers all shake out. I'm still concerned about the third linebacker position. EJ Speed played 45% of the snaps last year. So just because they're a nickel most of the time doesn't mean that they don't use that third linebacker. For one, when they're in their base 4-3, you need 3 linebackers. And 2, when Henry To'oTo'o or Azeez Al-Shaair misses time, if they miss time, then you got to have somebody you can trust in there. And I think it's a drastic fall off if they don't have somebody that they feel really good about right then and there. Beyond that, I feel good about CJ. And maybe it's because I've been seeing so many stupid takes about CJ in the national media. I feel like at least people in Houston, when they're down on CJ, most of them are coming from a solid foundation in what some of their concerns are. But people in the national media are just routinely framing CJ's entire season last year by those 2 playoff performances. And does he deserve criticism as well as a bunch of other people on the offense deserving criticism for that Patriots performance? Yes, 100%. Because, yes, even if the rest of the offense plays as poorly as they did, including the run game, which was pathetic. That CJ still, just by simply making some better decisions in that game, being more accurate on a few passes, they've got a much better chance of winning that game. But that doesn't mean that it gives you a license to say that that's the way he played all season long, that all of a sudden he's a guy that just doesn't care about taking care of the football or anything. That's just flat out wrong. So I think I've seen CJ operate this offense a lot more efficiently with a lot more command. And every time they've gone against a defense that isn't a Texans defense so far this preseason, in these joint practices, they've looked really good. Are the Raiders and the Panthers great defenses? Probably not. But they look like a team should look if you've got a quality offense and you're going against a lesser defense, certainly a lesser defense than the Houston Texans defense. So that part of it, I'm pretty optimistic about that. I'm inclined to worry about every little thing, and there's not nearly as many things that I'm worried about headed into this season as I was last season. Please, if you've listened this long, then my God, please leave a review, a good one. Give us a 5-star review. Leave some comments, like, subscribe, and so forth. Thanks to FanDuel for sponsoring the Believe in Texans podcast.